Hi everyone, super excited to welcome you to the OfferZen webinar on leveling up tech hiring, advice from tech makers. I'm Brendan, I am responsible for expansion at OfferZen, based here in Amsterdam. Tonight our program will be based in two sessions. First, a roundtable discussion, and then followed by a moderated Q&A. Thanks to all, by the way, for submitting a question and registration. Before we jump in, to make sure you get the most out of tonight's webinar, there are 3 tabs on the right of your screen: chat, Q&A, and polls, they are called. You can start off being nice and say hi and introducing yourself in the chat. And that's also the place where you can share comments, ideas, or random thoughts that you have during the webinar. Well, just to get the conversation going, let us know in the chat what is the worst piece of recruiting advice you have ever received. That should get some nice debate going. I hear, oh, I didn't turn off the sounds of the chat. Rookie mistake. Then you can pose questions during the Q&A session in the Q&A tab. If you find that scary, you can also simply upvote the questions that you like to increase the chances of them being asked. We'll also be posting a few polls during the conversation, and you can cast your vote on these in the poll tab. That is on housekeeping. Then on OfferZen, because I think quite a few of you do not know us yet, so I'm keen to introduce us. OfferZen is the largest developer community and tech talent marketplace of South Africa. Over 100,000 developers in our community. And we have recently launched in the Netherlands. We're live here since May 6th, helping companies hire great tech talent, but predominantly also helping developers find amazing positions. We invest heavily in community. That's what drives our marketplace. It's in our DNA. And that's also one of the reasons why we organize webinars as tonight, to get the stories out of developers, hiring managers, and tech leaders, so you can get your lessons from them and improve the work that you do, as well as drive connections and grow the local tech ecosystem. So thanks a lot for joining us tonight and to make that community reality. So as part of that community tonight, we have someone pretty special. I think he's great at what he does, Arjen, and let's jump in the first session with him. Arjen de Ruiter is a technology leader with a strong track record in software development, architecture, and operations. He has managed several software organizations in e-commerce and SaaS, and is currently the VP of Engineering at Sendcloud, which is the #1 shipping platform for e-commerce in Europe. At Sendcloud, he helps scale their tech organization to support the company's growth, as well as hiring and developing people, which is, of course, an important part of that role. So he'll be sharing more about what he does in this webinar right now. Arjen, very big welcome, and over to you.
Introduction. I'll tell a little bit more about myself. So Arjen, I'm born and raised in a little village near Rotterdam, where I lived the first half of my life, which was 23 years. So you can calculate my age now. The second half of my life was pretty much about working, and I started working at a company called Amgen, which is a biopharmaceutical company in Breda, which was at the time that you still did large projects, no agile, that kind of stuff. Later, I moved on to bol.com, and at bol.com I was a team lead for the marketing software teams, and later also a team lead for the platform infrastructure teams. And bol.com was actually my first position as a manager where I was involved in hiring a lot. So at Amgen I also was involved in hiring, but then more as a team lead of the future colleagues, and at bol.com more as a manager of the software teams for marketing. So that's what I did there. After bol.com I worked for a few other companies, and one of them was on a temp basis for Park Mobile. So I was independent consultant. Park Mobile is known for It's a famous parking app and a really big web scale environment as well. And during my time as independent consultant, I worked at Sendcloud, shipping company, e-commerce shipping company. And Sendcloud was actually such a nice company that the year after I decided to join them permanently. And that's why, as of this year, I work at Sendcloud in Eindhoven. As you can see, I live in Den Bosch. That's also where I'm at now. I'm working from home, like many of you. So Sendcloud, just a little bit of an introduction about Sendcloud, what it is. Sendcloud is a platform where you as a shop owner, so imagine you own a web shop and you want to have all the shipping options in there, like next day delivery via PostNL in the Netherlands, or delivery via FedEx or UPS. What you'd have to do if you want to have all these options in your shop yourself, you would have to do a hell of a job. You can also just take a subscription of Sendcloud, and then automatically all these shipping options will become available for you, so you can offer that to your customers. It's a really nice solution that really solves a problem for shop owners. And on the other side, all these carriers like PostNL or Royal Mail in the UK, or carriers in other countries throughout Europe, if they connect to us, they automatically get a lot of customers, of course, that can use their services. So it's the platform has two sides, the carriers and the shops. And there's really a lot of value in it for both of them. So that's where I work today. And my job is like, for a big part, really about hiring as well. And if you, for example, when I joined Sendcloud earlier this year, we had an IT team of 27. And this year we want to move to 39 already. And we just closed an investment round. And after the 39, next year we move on up toward the 50 and further. So hiring is a pretty big thing at Sendcloud these days, especially in a role like mine at software development and operations. My biggest lesson, well, there was just a question from Brandon, like, what was your worst advice? Well, I have like a worst experience that was, after all, like a very good experience, and it was actually when I got rejected. So around the time that I worked at Amgen, I also applied for at a company called InfoSupport in the Netherlands. And InfoSupport was at that time the most well-known company in Microsoft technology. So it was a Microsoft Gold partner, and I really wanted to work there. And I had 3 interviews there, and then they decided not to hire me, because actually Toon Jansen, the CEO and founder of InfoSupport, stepped in and he said, nice guy, Arjen, but dude, we're not going to hire you. And actually the main reason was because I didn't have a very strong technical background at that time. My background was business economics. I was a developer, but maybe not that good. And they were really a tech company, so they needed much more tech skills. And I'll get back to that, like what they could have done better to draw that conclusion in 1 interview instead of 3. But what was really good is that Toon gave me the advice, Arjen, if I was you, I would do a bachelor in software engineering or a master in software engineering, because that makes you as a person much stronger. And that is something that when I joined Sendcloud, also saw some others do, because actually I followed up on his advice. Of course, first I thought, it's nonsense, I'm not going to do that, I'm good enough. But a few months later, I really thought, well, he actually had a point. And I decided to do that bachelor in Eindhoven. He recommended Den Haag, The Hague, and Eindhoven. I did Eindhoven, and I worked for 2 years, 2 evenings a week, like crazy. And then I graduated, and I was on that right level. And what is really nice, what I saw later at Sendcloud, see a few guys do, is that when we do not make somebody an offer, we do give them the advice like, hey, if you improve this, then you might get to that level. And then sooner or later, you'll see these guys come back. or during an interview with a more junior person, not just ask tough questions, but also explain what a good answer would be so that they learn something. And I like it that I saw people doing that, because that is also what helped me a lot. So that comes down to the point that the hiring for me is not really just about the moment that you hire somebody. So it's not like tomorrow we need somebody, so now we post a vacancy, and then we're going to find some people that we're going to hire, and then we close a vacancy. And these days, especially in tech hiring, there's so few candidates and so much demand, even in this situation still that we're in economically, that you can't really afford to only focus on new candidates when you need them. So you constantly have to focus on the part that becomes before the hiring process, which is the attracting, is make sure that with the right employer branding, people know you, and that you know the right people, so that at the moment that you need people, you already have a strong brand, that you are top of mind with these people. And the latter is especially for the moment that they need you. If they're looking for a job, you want to make sure that you are top of mind with them. And ways to do that is, for example, that we are about to sponsor some open source projects that of components that we're using, sponsoring events, sharing information on your blog, all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't maybe lead to a candidate from one day to the other, but you definitely build a brand. And at the moment that you want to hire people, when you reach out, people know who you are and are willing to talk to you. Only then, the hiring part starts, but it already starts way earlier. Once you have hired, it's also important to get the most out of it, of course. So that's also an important part of it. So you spend like hours in interviews, you make somebody an offer that maybe costs you as a company like 60K a year. Well, then you better get the most out of it. So the part after the hiring is also really important. Some companies ask approval to spend €100, but they just make a decision on a new hire in 1 hour, while the new hire is cost you maybe like thousands a year. So it's really important to keep on developing, because otherwise it's also a waste of money. So to do this, you really need to have a good collaboration between the people of HR, or what we call house of talent, or very specifically the recruiter that you're working with. So this is all done as a collaboration. So there's no recruiter who is just doing work on his own. There's also no IT guy like me who is doing work on his own. This is a collaboration. And it starts with the marketing in the labor market until the hiring and the further developing of people. So focusing on the hiring, because this is not about employer branding or about developing people once they're hired. Focusing on development. So I got on the hiring, sorry. So I got rejected at that company called InfoSupport, which was at the end good for me, because that triggered me and I started doing my bachelor in software engineering. My question to you guys is, they did 3 interviews, and I think they could have done it in 1 if they would have chosen the right approach. So what is, do you think, a good early predictor of later success? And there's a few options in there in the poll online. If you could submit your vote, please. So what is the best one? You can select one: the structured interview, the test, the resume, or references. All right. So yeah, it's good to see the result, because 63% says a test is a very good early predictor, and 38% says a structured interview. Somebody mentions a reference. I was later thinking actually about the reference. So in my opinion, a reference was not that positive, but I meant it in the sense of, I meant a reference in the sense of, when I ask somebody, can you give me a good reference about who I can talk to, that's often not a very good predictor, because there will be people who speak positively about the candidate anyway. Another type of reference would be I know somebody at a company that I worked before, and I know he's a good engineer. Yeah, that's of course a strong reference. In general, the resume is not that interesting for a prediction, of course. Well, unless somebody really makes a bad resume, and you can quickly see that it's not going to be a match. But in general, the resume is a nice trigger for a structured interview, and then also do a test. And I'll get back to the test and the structured interview in a moment, because these are the ones that really help find the right person. Before we go there, my second question is, what is most easy to assess? Somebody's motivation, technical skills, or behavioral competencies? Yeah, so most people say skills, somebody says motivate. Quite some people say motivation actually, and nobody says competencies. Oh, it's still changing. Yeah, so 2/3 say skills, 1/3 motivation, nobody says competencies. I personally actually think that that motivation is really the hardest. So some people think it's easy, but if I would ask somebody what your motivation is to work for Sendcloud, and they would say, well, I think it's a really cool SaaS company, online business, but that person comes, for example, from Egypt or Russia, yeah, then it most likely the motivation is that you want to move abroad. That's often just the case. You have to just be fair about it, and that's no problem. Somebody's real motivations, people will always tell you that you're a nice company to work for and that you have a nice tech stack, that kind of stuff. But the actual motivation, so what drives somebody, why does somebody want to be a developer at all? Why does somebody want to work for you? Is at the end really hard to assess, because it comes down to personal drives. And personal drives you often just find out after a year or so working with somebody what really drives that person, what is his worldview, and so forth. What is easier to check, definitely easiest, is skills, because you can do a test for that, and I'll get back to that as well. Another one is competencies, because there you use a structured interview. So going to the structured interview, so we have an approach where the recruiter first calls the candidates to do a first check after maybe going through a list with me or somebody else. And then if that's okay, we plan a first interview. What is important here is that the recruiter and you are on the same page on, for example, the tech strategy and where are your current teams, what's the state of the current teams and where do you want to go? So what kind of people are you looking for? Company values is almost always known with the recruiter because he or she also works in your company. But your tech strategy is really important to share because it helps that person to see in a resume who is the best fit, but also in an interview you can ask targeted questions. So in our case, our technology strategy is that we want to move from a large code base to small services. We want to integrate them continuously and deploy every day to production. We want to do that on dynamic infrastructure, and we want to do that with autonomous teams. So this means that if somebody worked on a large project with massive teams, that's probably not a good fit when we want to work on small services with autonomous teams. So this already kind of helps select the right candidate. And what you can also do then is if you have the tech strategy clear, and for example, we currently have a team with a lot of people who have a very academic approach, maybe you want to have people with a more pragmatic approach, or you have people who are not so good in structure and planning, and that would then require people who are better in that. So if you and your recruiter are on the same page there, that makes it easier to find the right people. And it also makes it easier to come up with a structured interview, because what you could say is that during an interview we just pick 2 or 3 topics, and that is, for example, related to your tech strategy. And let's say that we find it important that somebody has experience with building services, then that person could claim that, like anybody these days claim microservices. But then you could, of course, dive into that and you first explain then, like, why is it important to you? Because we want to scale, because we want teams to be independent. And then you can ask somebody after you told why is it important to you, do you have experience with an organization that scales, and can you tell me about it? And what was your role in there? That's the third point here. So, okay, you worked in an organization that had scaling issues. Can you explain us about the scaling issues? Technical scaling, organizational scaling. Technical scaling is maybe about something that scales vertically and needs to scale horizontally. This is, of course, where then a tech interviewer, an engineer comes in as well to discuss. That person maybe claims, yeah, I can do microservices, but you can do microservices right and you can do them wrong. So here we ask, like, what did you personally contribute? What was your role? If somebody, if you dive into it, and somebody was member of a team of 8, and maybe there were 2 architects in there, and that person was executing the plans that the architects came up with, that says something about the level of that person. Doesn't have to mean that it's right or wrong, because even if somebody appears to be media or junior, we still can make the person an offer. It's then just on the right level with the right benefits. And you also always ask, like, what was the result? So you moved from, you implemented services, but what was the result? So that somebody is not just doing microservices because it's popular, but you also see if they understand why we're actually doing it. So if you take a few of these items that somebody claims, so somebody might claim that he's experienced with services, claims that he is a team player, claims that he's a good communicator. Well, these are also things that are important according to our tech strategy, to our principles, values as a company. Then these are the ones that we pick out, and that's where you target on in a structured interview. And then basically take this approach, which is also known as the STAR approach, where you first ask the situation, then the task that somebody else has, what that person contributed to it, and what the result was. Now, you should also keep it fun, of course. So another way of asking this is also, what would you do? Because otherwise it almost feels like an interrogation, and that's not what we want to do either. That doesn't really fit our company. It should be fun to work, and that should also be clear during the interview already. So what we would definitely also do is like, hey, what would you do to solve certain issues that we have? And then dive into that, keep on asking until it's very clear whether that person really understands what he's talking about or not. So who of you do tests during the hiring process? That's everybody, which is pretty good then. So yeah, at Sendcloud, we also do tests. So it's important though, is what we kind of figured out the last period, is that on one hand, it is a nice way to tell candidates how high the bar is. Yeah, so if you do a decent test, then as a candidate, hey, my future colleagues also pass that test, so I know what I'm going to end up with. If you would not do any test and you would do a very easy interview, a candidate might think like, yeah, this is, anybody can join it, so I might not want to join this company. So on one hand, you can tell people like what standards are in the company. On the other hand, it should not scare off or delay the process. And what we found is that our current test takes pretty long, so we're trying to bring it down to to a test where you get somewhere in a sweet spot. If you currently do a test that takes somebody 4 hours, it would be nice to find another test that does the same thing in 2 hours and have the same level of prediction for future performance. At the end, the test is also nice to get into very specific discussions, because it's not always about right or wrong, and somebody might make other decisions than you would that are not necessarily wrong, but it's just nice to have a discussion. And the discussion is also good to have a nice interview. So the negative outcome, it can also be turned invaluable. So let's say you did the structured interview, and where you really focus on some competencies and skills, then you did a test, and in our case, a test is also focused on skills, but you could also focus a test on competencies. We currently don't do that. We do that in a structured interview. But let's say the outcome is negative in that sense that we're not making somebody an offer. Then you basically end up in a situation that I was in when I applied for that job like 15 years ago at InfoSupport. And then what is really important, because that person might be looking for a job 5 years later, or that person might be telling about us to his friends or his former colleagues. So you really want to finish it in a positive way. So what we do with the more junior people during the interview, we explain them what the right answers would be, and they learn. And the nice thing is that you see them writing down things and following up. And if we send them, let's say, the sorry letter, well, which is basically not a letter, but an email, or preferably a call where we tell them, like, why not, then we also share them recommendations on what to work on. And recently we also started sharing the training track that we offer to our more junior colleagues, so that these people that we did not make an offer can do that training track themselves at their own pace. And they are free to call us back in 12 months later or something. And this is also then part of that whole approach, where it's not just about the hiring moment, but it's also about the employer branding, the attracting, getting to know each other, and also the developing later. Basically, the hiring moment is just a kind of a moment that matters, getting people to know you is a moment that matters. Getting people in a first call is a moment that matters. Signing a contract is a moment that matters. But the first day at work, and the first one-on-one, and the first performance review, and the first promotion are also moments that matter. It's just one step in there. And it's really important for somebody. You give them this feedback, and they might just return later. So another important point, and then I'm almost done, that's avoiding disappointment, because you do have the people that you not hire, and then you tell them like what they can improve. You also have the people that you make an offer, and then you want to avoid that expectations were totally different. So what we do is that actually before the first interview, we check expectations in terms of like, what are you thinking about in terms of the income you want to make. And if somebody, for example, says like, hey, I want to make 60K, for us, that's not an issue. The only thing is, if you want to make 60K, you might have to be of a certain level. And then if somebody is not on that level, we can still offer him a position, but then maybe for less, because otherwise it would not fit, and that would also frustrate the current team that we're having. We cannot just get somebody on board that is like way over the current team in the set of salary, while he's not that much better. So we really check that up front. And then what we recently had with somebody who was really on a high level, we discussed up front what the offer would be if he passes the tests, and if he still likes us after that, if he's also positive about us. So he passed the test, it went really well. He was also very happy about it. He wanted to join us, and the offer was just already known up front then. So that makes that, in case of an offer letter, that makes it really go smooth. I actually already said this. I was ahead of my slide. So this is, at the end, this is just the start. So this is just one moment. And, you spend so much effort with all these interviews. You decided to make somebody an offer that's going to cost you like 40, 50, 60, 70K a year. It's a lot of money. Now you really get the most out of it. And that person quit his other job, and he makes a big step too. So you really need to make sure that at that moment you also keep on spending time on developing for his or her benefit, and also for you as a company. Having said that, that's it. So maybe if there's any questions, we can dive into this.
I think you were very complete, Arjen.
That's probably it.
Probably it. Yes. Well, I see somebody Patricia saying, "Love your approach. Thanks for sharing." And the long-term thing. So positive reviews, Arjen. Thanks a lot for that. What stood out to me was what I liked, also what you said later on, turning a negative outcome in a positive. which is something that you still do, but actually came from your own experience, as you said in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was, I did not really make that a topic at Sendcloud, but when I first joined interviews with one of my colleagues called Yevgeny and another one called Fabio, they do these interviews really well. And what I saw is that they actually did exactly the same. And it's partially because they are personally also motivated by making people better. And it's not just about doing a tough interview and then only look at your own interests, but then when it's not good enough, also look at the person's interests. And maybe maybe you meet twice, so why not to do that? Yeah.
Exactly.
I never joined that company, by the way, because I just had other really good employers. But I would definitely recommend that company that did not hire me but gave me their advice. I would definitely recommend that company to other people, and that's good, right?
Yeah, well, besides, I think it's a decent thing to do to give good feedback. That also ties into the other thing that you said about your employer brand. You want to be top of mind before you start the hiring process, because that will get you the best talent. I think it's close to the heart of OfferZen as well. You have taken this long-term approach by adding value in every step of the way. So that resonated with me that you do the same. You have the same approach. I think good things come to people that do good things, right? I think that's the thing. Thanks a lot, Arjen. That's great.
Right.
Very, very insightful. I'll get back to you. It's a new world. Normally you would say we'll have a beer afterwards, but that's kind of hard today.
I will have a beer anyway.
We'll have a beer later, maybe in Den Bosch one day.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
I have to mention one thing. Also interested in you might be hiring. We have done a pretty extensive report on what developers think of remote working. So keep an eye out for that after the webinar. We'll be sure to send it to you. But the webinar is not over. Let's go to the second part. I'd love to introduce Ellie. Ellie is one of our great talent advisors, and she will be moderating the next conversation. Over to you, Ellie. What a great background.
I know, right? Snapsies. Thank you so much, Brendan. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you, Arjen. That was very, very insightful, and I think potentially a couple topics will also come up in the conversation today as well with Burke, Kieran, and myself. Just to give a little introduction into myself, like Brendan introduced, I'm a talent advisor at OfferZen. I've been working here for almost 3 years now. Originally started in the South African market, and then this year when we expanded into the EU, specifically the Netherlands, I was charged with the task to launch there as well. So during my time of working with the EU market, I had the pleasure to work with both Burke and Kieran, so we are well acquainted, but I will allow them to introduce themselves as well as potentially as a little icebreaker. They didn't know that this was coming, but Kieran, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Burke. If you could just introduce yourself and then give me your opinion on tabs versus spaces.
Right. So I'm Kieran. I'm South African. I've been living in Amsterdam for about 4 years. Currently working. I started just 2 months ago at a little startup in Amsterdam, a company called Ziver. Previously, as a student, I did a lot of internships at a huge mix of companies, startups in South Africa, through to some big names like Facebook and Amazon. Tabs versus spaces. My rational answer says it should depend on the language you're working with, but in my heart, spaces. Spaces are objectively better.
Awesome. Burke?
Okay. Hi, I'm Burke. I'm also living in Amsterdam for the last 4 years. I work on defense industry and telecommunication and large companies like SAP. And right now I'm working on DPG Media as a machine learning engineer. I started like 2 weeks ago. I like tabs because it's easy to press tab, actually. I don't want to press 4 times the space. That's just a choice, probably.
Okay, interesting. Two different opinions there. I'm quite curious to hear what our audience potentially thinks. Please feel free to post any chat comments. It might light the fire on the debate even further. But yeah, like without further ado, I think I'll start the conversation with, we're here to really talk about tech recruitment and the interview process. And both, recently Burke and Kieran, you entered into the kind of stage in your life where you're like, okay, I need to make a change. I need to change my job. And that obviously then comes with the treacherous, sometimes, job search. So I think I'll start with the lighter side, I guess, of a job search. When deciding to change jobs, what is it that is potentially exciting around what you're about to face? Kieran, if you would like to kick us off.
Yeah, so I think it's quite an exciting process of discovery, right? Like having that opportunity to learn better what's out there, what companies are doing, what cool things they're working on, and inevitably, as part of the process, you meet a lot of interesting people, grow your network, people you can learn from.
Yeah.
Awesome, Burke. Yeah.
Here you see very exciting companies. There are exciting opportunities, and there are some new things. I think that excites me a lot when looking for a new company. Also, you meet with very nice people on the market. They are really ambitious, especially in startups. Yeah.
Have you guys, found that, with the individuals that you meet, potentially if you don't necessarily get hired by that company, or if you're not successful with that recruiter, is that network maintained? Is it easy to kind of, benefit from that experience? Burke?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. And I was actually curious, you both mentioned learning new things about yourself. And, it rings true just what Arjen was saying around, going into a process and getting feedback. Is the daunting sort of experience of getting feedback from companies, is that linked to the exciting learning point, or is that maybe something that's actually quite tough? I'll start with Kieran.
Bit of both, right? Like it's useful, and I can channel that into my own personal growth, but it's a little bit of a hit to the morale every time.
Okay, and why? How do you deal with that?
I try to school myself to look at it constructively. It's actually very nice when interviewers do give that kind of feedback, interviewers and companies, because like Arjen was talking about earlier, I can put it to use. Like I've recently, through my last round of job hunting, had some negative feedback and changed the way I present myself and sort of the priorities I focus on as a result. So I try to always look on the constructive, positive side of it.
Cool. Burke, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, actually there is something called interview experience that people should get. So yeah, it's really useful, that feedbacks. I really looking for them. Sometimes when they don't give feedback, I just call them and tell them to give my feedback. It's really important. Actually, while I decided to change my jobs, I start with the companies that I don't want to get hired. So I get some interview feedback and I know what I need to improve upon.
Okay, that's interesting. I was going to say, it's very interesting that you say that, because I'm kind of two opinions. You kind of like, do you practice with some of the companies that you're not that keen on first, or do you kind of like reduce fatigue and just go in head first with like your favorite companies? I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, kind of like, shaking off the interview jitters, so to speak. I'm curious though, if you've had feedback that like you didn't agree with, and like what did you do with it? I'll start with Burke just because you answered previously.
Okay. Yes, it happens a lot, because also the interview may not understand or cannot evaluate you. So it happens. But it's an interview. They see you for half an hour, so they cannot evaluate you correctly sometimes. It happens that I disagree.
To extend on what Berk said, the interviews are a very noisy process with a lot of randomness and uncertainty. So, sometimes the evaluation is just wrong. And as the interviewee, we have to apply judgment to whether their assessment is reflective of our true selves. But I've had a couple of instances where I couldn't attribute it to any mistake in the interviewing process, and instead I have to take it as a sign of the nature of their company, their culture.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen things, where, someone might give you feedback like, we're looking for someone a little more extroverted or something like that. I think there is that kind of like give or take, either you are or you're not. Maybe there is a bit of learning there to be like present yourself better, or maybe you just like, that's not the company for me. So I think that's a good, like, you have to be insightful around that feedback to know whether to take it with a pinch of salt, or really to work on it, I guess. So, we've we've kind of alluded to a couple of the challenges of entering into a job search. And so I'll start with quite a broad question. When you know that you're about to embark on this journey and you're going to have to be filling in the CVs and chatting to recruiters, what is probably the number one thing that you are dreading? Kieran, let's start with you.
Biggest thing by far, putting in my resignation. I just hate it. Not really anything else, to be honest.
I did not expect that one. I'll comment on that, but I'd like to hear Berk's first.
I usually leave a job when I get bored, or I start working on other projects that are related to the work job I'm doing. Yeah.
Is there anything that you don't look forward to when you know that you have to start, looking for a new position?
Same as I hate resignation, and no, actually, it excites me when I'm leaving, if I decided on to leave.
So I'd love to know a little bit more around why resignation is such a big dread for you, Kieran or Berk. Whoever wants to take it first, Kieran.
It's there's always a good chance you're going to hurt someone's feelings. Like the last job I left, I don't know, my manager seemed very personally invested in what I thought of him and the company. And, to tell him, like, I'm actually not enjoying it here anymore, I'm going to go elsewhere, it's, there's usually some hurt feelings and judgment which comes along with that. On your side or on the company side, or probably both? Well, so if I reach that point, I'm feeling pretty judgmental already, right? My feelings are already hurt, but it's just, uncomfortable to face those sad looks, the puppy dog eyes from a manager who doesn't want you to leave.
Does it make it easier if, potentially you've had that like open conversation with the manager and they kind of know it's coming?
Sometimes not. The last job I left, I think my manager sensed for a couple months that I wasn't loving it anymore. Expected me to leave, but still, when the day comes, you can only prepare yourself so much.
I think it's just human tendency, right? Like we never want to let anyone down, especially if you've had some level of relationship. And I think, often when you're in the job search, you're so focused on that next opportunity. Even when it's an amazing opportunity and you've got everything that you wanted, you're like, oh no, now I actually have to do this really hard thing. And sometimes the good opportunity doesn't make the hard thing any easier. I don't know if Berk, I don't know if you've had a similar experience.
After the resignation, yeah. Actually, I had a recent experience that my manager kind of blocked me on some grounds and didn't want to talk to me, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes the process much more challenging. Okay, so that was not really the first thing that I thought you guys were going to dread about entering into the job search, but it definitely, I think, is something that is definitely overlooked. And like for me, sometimes I forget, when I'm helping candidates through the interview process, that there's still this current company, there's still this current loyalty and sort of, psychological trust there. But so Kieran, we've had, some time working together, and you introduced a little bit yourself around the internships and stuff that you've done, kind of to get yourself set up to really get that position that you really want, specifically within the Netherlands. And so from what I can tell, it seems, you've been very intentional, very directional with where you want to go and how you want to present yourself. Do you feel, that the sort of efforts of your labor has been recognized, when you enter into the job search?
It's a mixed bag, right? So like you said, since I finished high school, I've spent close to a decade optimizing my CV. But by the conventional ways of counting years of experience, I'm only at like 3 years of experience, despite having put in quite a few more years during my student days. I found that I've had more success with in-house recruiters, typically where they're dealing more directly with the hiring manager. They have a more nuanced understanding of the needs. And but I've also had plenty of experiences with recruiting agencies who they have a job spec, they have a checklist of criteria, and they're going by the book. And it's just so frustrating trying to communicate that, well, your checklist is wrong.
Burke, I don't know if you've had, any sort of, barriers to companies wanting to interview you in terms of just like, not really recognizing the skill set that you have.
Yes, I would actually say that I'm removing stuff from my resume sometimes because I have a very large experience and I really do programming as a hobby. So I do front end, back end, machine learning, and I do everything. Most people don't believe that I have experience in them, so I'm removing them. And also the checklist is a problem. I also have that interview ask me very specific questions. Do you have experience in this one? I don't, but I worked on something similar, and they don't accept it. They're just looking for very specific keywords, especially some agency recruiters. So yeah, that's frustrating.
Yeah, I dealt with a recruiter recently where one of their checklist items was MongoDB. And now I, as a developer, I know NoSQL databases in general. I've worked with many flavors of them, but not this particular one. Do you have any experience with MongoDB? No, but I mean, it's easy, right? I can pick that up in 2 hours. But exactly. I mean, without being to relate to that, it becomes an instant disqualification.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I may, it almost seems like what's really causing potential like early disqualification is this lack of being able to assess how easy or like how strong your learning ability is, or like I'm trying to think about how quickly you can pick up something. Just because I don't necessarily have it on my CV doesn't mean that I can't learn it. I think, Burke, you and I were chatting about how often candidates get rejected because they don't have that one word on their profile, and hiring managers will spend weeks and weeks and weeks trying to find that right candidate, whereas they could have spent the same amount of time teaching that candidate how to do the thing.
Yes, I actually had an experience with I had a few that agents asked, do you have experience in? Yeah, I have years of experience in that. Why didn't you add this keyword on your CV? And they told me to renew my CV with that keywords and send my CV again. It also happened.
To send on to their client, right?
Yeah, to send the client.
Yeah, I think like an interesting comparison is if you look at who gets promoted internally at companies from developer to senior to principal or whatever, however the ladder goes. For the most part, it's the developers who are very capable at picking up new things because the landscape changes so fast. And especially in a more business-driven environment, you need to be able to adapt to the needs. And the ones who can do that successfully are the ones who climb. And yet it's so often overlooked through agency recruitment.
Also, in the software companies, that the company that I started changed the language totally after a year. So I remember that they were hiring for one language, and after 4 months, they said that, yeah, we are going to leave that language totally. So actually learning is more important than being experienced in that language.
For sure.
So,
Definitely.
as a developer, then how can you make yourself showcase this kind of skill? How do you make yourself, let hiring managers in on, hey, I'm actually a pretty good learner, let alone, this is just my skill set?
So I have the personal good fortune of having performed pretty well at some high school and university level programming contests, which are pretty strong points on my CV to people who recognize those. Another thing I do, which I recommend to others, is to build a portfolio. So a bunch of GitHub repositories, for example, just show off some cool things you can do. Like I've built a couple of quirky projects. I built a chat bot because I wanted one for my own personal use, so I put it on GitHub. When I did a fun little contest last year, I published my code on GitHub. At that particular one, I also challenged myself and some friends to do it in as many different programming languages as possible. I did it. I used like 15 different languages for this contest, and not every company is going to care about that sort of thing, but the ones that do are more interesting to me, and it's often recognized.
Yeah, I also do the same. I have a very active GitHub account. I have lots of projects. I also write blog posts and share on LinkedIn. Being on LinkedIn attracts a lot of people and keeping contacts with other developers. Yeah. Also, I got actually good contacts on the meetups. I'm also very active on the meetups. Before this Corona thing, I was very active.
Meetups are good.
Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, I think definitely in terms of, from my point of view, when I'm helping candidates build their profile, the classic, show your work. Are you involved in any blog articles, reading Medium? What is that flavor that you have, kind of to showcase that you are hungry for that knowledge? What was I going to say now? Just, sorry, lost my. Oh yeah, I was going to ask. Do you think that potentially, tech recruiters that might not be as technically savvy, so that if they open your GitHub, it might as well be in Korean? Do you think that maybe those companies are missing out on what you guys are showing? Like, hey, listen, I've got this spice to me, and sometimes it's not actually being recognized.
Actually, that most companies don't check GitHub or anything or blog posts. They don't even check LinkedIn. So it's not useful for most companies. But the companies you want to work for, check it.
Yeah, I agree with Buck. It's usually doesn't help to get a foot in the door, but once you have an entry point, for me at least, it's gone a long way towards supporting my case. Oh, and of course, I left out the best way to make yourself stand out, which is to know someone on the inside. Internal referrals, they're just the best when you can get them.
So that's actually quite interesting, because Arjen's presentation around what is the best way to try and assess whether a candidate's good for them, the sort of resume references was on the I don't know side, and the test and the structured interviews was more on the that's a good side. So I mean, I 100% have seen the value of internal referrals, and it basically kind of seems like there is this problem where it's certain candidates that should be hired because they are brilliant for the fact that they can pick up anything and learn quickly, are not being seen by the companies that actually would really value them, because sometimes it's those companies that aren't looking for the right thing. They're just looking at that cookie cutter sort of CV checklist.
Yeah, to be fair, trying to figure out how capable someone is of learning and adapting is quite hard. You can only really get a good measurement on that from working with someone for a couple of weeks or months. Otherwise, if you're interviewing me and you're trying to figure out how well I learn and adapt, all you've got is my testimony. You can believe it. Maybe I can make a convincing case. But for sure, I know lots of developers who can pick up new technical topics quickly, but aren't so great at advocating for themselves.
Yeah, it's the same. It's really hard to evaluate. I was telling them it's pair programming together is a good way to do an interview, so you know that how fast a person can adapt to changes. But yeah, that's the only thing that can work it out. But it's really hard to evaluate this during an interview. I don't actually see much way other than peer programming together.
I was just wondering, is it often that you guys, I mean, obviously COVID sometimes adds a little bit of difficulty there, but do you ever get like invited into the company, spend like half a day with the team, tinker on some code, see what they're working on, like before you actually sign that offer?
I've had exactly one invitation like that, and the position was filled by someone else before I got the chance. It's very rare. I'm of two minds about how good it would be, because on the one hand, yes, it's very useful data for me to decide whether I want to work at this company. But on the other hand, it's quite a lot of time out of my life. And especially if I'm still, in my last weeks at my previous company, it can be really tricky to make the stars align to get that time.
I did this a few times. It's too much time. Also, at least you need to give up one day. You need to get a day off from your work. Also, this is different because I was actually on the recruiting side, and we were doing the half a day interviews. We give up on that after a year because it was very frustrating for the people, and they were actually giving up interviews after that stage. They said they don't want to continue because it's too frustrating to do that. So we gave up.
Wow. So it's like the time old age of like, you go into depth so that you can get the knowledge you need, but then it's too time consuming. And so that not actually the candidates that you might want to get have the time.
Also, they found it stressful. We literally get this feedback. It's stressful.
Well, I mean, I had to do a full day simulation day for my role. So I've been there. I arrived at OfferZen 7 a.m. and left 7 p.m. It was stressful, but I'm still here 3 years later. So it was a good fit, if anything. So Burke, I wanted to touch on the fact, you've got extensive experience, as with various developer roles as well as machine learning. And you've been in the Netherlands, for the last 4 years, obviously interviewing experienced different recruiters and companies. I'd love to know, what are some of the sort of recruitment tactics that you've maybe experienced that have been a bit of a discourager in the interview process for you?
Yes, I actually told you that there are some interviewers, the recruiters, they are kind of fake. They get your name and send it to the company, and they don't talk to you ever again. They just send your CV. Yes, and I got, like, when I turn on LinkedIn or when turn on my open for opportunities, I got lots of calls like that, and like 3 or 4 of them on the same is for the same opportunity or for the same job. They just call you, get your CV. Sometimes they lie about sending your CV. I explained to you there was a recruiter. He was literally lying about showing your CV to the recruiting manager, and that recruiting manager actually liked you. And we found out about this when I talked to my friends about the recruiter, that he was lying. You need to get ready for this kind of scammy recruiters.
Do you not find that you can detect them quite early, though? Because I've noticed, especially from LinkedIn messages, I mean, a lot of it is just obvious garbage.
Yeah, a lot. They usually call directly. So
Maybe I'm not as nice on the phone as you are.
I was going to say, what about the message, or what about the reach out reads as garbage?
I mean, so there are some classic ones where, like, my LinkedIn profile says Java and the job says JavaScript. It's shocking that that still happens, but it does a lot. Yeah, I regularly get messages about just completely irrelevant tech stacks, like, hey, I see you have experience in C++. No, I don't. Where did you fabricate that from? But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes the initial contact sounds very robotic. It's like a mail merge. Like, it's, I have this thing, please apply to it. Well, you're giving me no sense of why you think this is, I would be good for this, or why it'd be interesting to me. On the flip side, it's really great when you get one of those personalized, like, oh, I saw your LinkedIn profile, I went digging through your GitHub repo and your personal websites, and I noticed these unusual things about you. That really grabs my attention. Because it means they've done the work to check that this is relevant to me, which means I get to skip that.
I actually have a check for this. On my LinkedIn profile, there is a code that I change like every month. And I said that if you send me a message, please add this code. Otherwise, I will not reply you. And there
Does it work?
Yes, some recruiters, they send you, I read your LinkedIn profile. It's really good. It's really fit my profile. And they don't add the code. So I know that they haven't read my profile ever.
I have a version of that which says, please only contact me in English. And I get a lot in Dutch.
Yeah.
I also get a lot for jobs in South Africa. And I have to wonder every time whether a 15,000 kilometer commute is worth it.
Wow. So I think this kind of touches on the age-old stereotype around recruiters, is that but there are some that don't know the candidates well enough, and there are some that don't know the companies well enough. And I think you have a double whammy when they don't really know the company and they don't really know the candidate. And I think that's when you get the, hey, Mr. C++, and you're like, no. So yeah, I mean, how can recruiters be better with this? Like, what would you want? Like, you've touched on the fact, like, putting a little more effort with you, and making the message a little more personal. Is there anything else that can really kind of relieve that, like, fakeness selling kind of feel?
The fortunate part for me and the unfortunate part for you guys is that it's really a seller's market right now. As a recruiter, you got to jump through some hoops to make the developer happy if you want to actually get those decent hires. So personally, I mean, I don't expect a lot. The bar has been set very low. But what I hope for is just having done that, 2 minutes of due diligence, that I do actually in some way line up with what you're looking for. Like, I don't even expect it to be a super close fit, because it's super hard to judge this from the outset. But I want to not be bombarded with irrelevant stuff.
Yeah, also me too. In my profile, I literally explain which languages and which topics I'm interested in. So if they read it, probably 10 seconds, they will know what to tell me. And there are really nice recruiters. They read it and send me the message that I'm expecting. And I literally reply every recruiter.
And what's more important for you in terms of that, like, alignment? Is it the technical alignment, or kind of your interest alignment?
For me, interest is more important, because I can work in any language or any technical field. But if on the technical part, if it's aligned, it's better.
Yeah, I'm going to make this difficult for you and say the opposite. I'm interested in a lot of things. Like, I'm really not attached to the nature of the business or the industry that the company's working in, because so much of it is interesting. But like, there are certain phases of technology that I want nothing to do with.
I love that. I love the different answers. I'd actually, I'm going to definitely think about this more often, because in my experience, I have had exactly both this. I've had candidates that are like, I'll learn whatever it is as long as I'm working in healthcare, and other candidates that are like, Java, nothing but Java. Just give me the Java. I don't care where I am. It's fine.
So Java in particular, I get very on edge when a recruiter approaches me about a Java job, because in my experience, people who love Java really love Java to the exclusion of everything else. It tends to be a very dogmatic group of people. I've worked a lot in Java. I think Java's pretty all right, but I don't love it that much, and I don't want you shutting everything else out. This is not a recruiting problem. This is a hiring company's problem.
I worked with Java for a long time, and yeah, I also met with people who doesn't want to learn other languages. But actually, it makes your life easier if you work in one language for a long time. That's what I have seen recently, because there are lots of opportunities for Java. You can stay in it and don't do anything outside of much. For me, I'm more interested in learning new things, so I learn a lot of languages. I'm not fanatic of any language at all.
I'm the same as you, but there's a case to be made for both sides.
Yes.
Definitely, and I think it just like it kind of shows already, there's grouping of candidates and there's grouping of companies. You have candidates that are the tech is more important versus the company is more important. And with companies, they're like, we don't care what language you know, as long as you come in and you learn, it's fine. And also companies are like, if you don't know Java and if you don't want to work with Java for the rest of your life, we will not hire you. So I think it's just around finding that right fit. So I have realized that we've actually come back to the full hour now. Thank you so much. That went really quickly. Time flies when you're having fun and intellectual conversations. So I really, really like to say thank you so much. It's so nice seeing you guys again on video, Burke and Kieran. And I'll just hand back to Brendan.
Hello. Thanks a lot, guys. That was great. Good insights. Thanks, Arjen, Burke, and Kieran. And of course, you, Ellie, for moderating the conversation. Just a quick reminder, I know I said it in the break as well, but keep an eye out for that email with the remote report. And obviously, there is a link in that email that to a form, and if you fill that in, we'll be sure to send you some swag. If you don't know what that is, you should really fill in the form and then you'll receive it at home. And also, we would like to invite you to the next event, which is Building High-Performing Engineering Teams with Raoul Herbster, who is an engineering manager at Spotify, which is happening on the 15th of October. And you will be redirected to the registration page at the end of this webinar. Thanks so much for joining and hope to see you on the 15th. Bye-bye.